real estate stew with the What's Cookin' Crew. I'm Keisha.
And I'm Patrick, guys.
And we are so thrilled to be with you today with an extra special treat.
And guys, you know, we've been telling you that we were going to do an on-site inspection live for you, and today is the day, guys. We're going to keep that promise, and we are here at one of our clients' homes, and we're going to do an actual foundation inspection live so that you can see exactly how this process works.
Yes, and that is so important because we know that your home is one of your largest investments next to your kids.
Yeah.
Yes,
So now wait a minute. Okay, did you say kids, Keisha?
I did.
Okay, now listen. When I think investment,
Uh-huh.
I think profit. I think gains. So I'm thinking, buying a home, that's an investment. Stocks, investing in stocks, purchasing stock, that's an investment. But kids, I mean,
true.
Keisha, kids, to me, that's a loss, right? I mean, how's that an investment?
Well, there was a report that came out from the U.S. Department of Agriculture that stated from the ages of 0 to 17, it costs over $233,000 to raise a child. So when my child turns 18, I am going to expect a return on my investment. Yes, indeed.
Okay, you know what? We are actually on site to talk about foundations and to do an actual foundation inspection. So Keisha, I think that this is a conversation we will continue at a later time and date. Let's talk about the foundation. How about that?
Fair enough. Okay, well, going back to the foundation, one of the things that we wanted to highlight that might be helpful to our viewers, we wanted to talk about some of the warning signs that could potentially indicate a problem with your foundation.
Yeah, and honestly, Keisha, there's 7 in specific that we want to discuss with you today that we think are important for you to be aware of. And Keisha, why don't you?
Yes, number 1, let's go ahead and start with the obvious, cracks. So whenever you start noticing cracks in your walls, both interior and exterior walls, your floors and your foundation itself, that could be cause for concern. Not always, because sometimes the home will do some normal movement, but if you start noticing large cracks or any cracks, that might be a reason to call somebody to come check it out.
And guys, sign number 2 is referred to as like settling or sinking. So in your home, you may find that you're walking on your foundation and there's kind of like this dip, right? Or your kids are playing, right? And the kids have their marbles and the ball's out and the ball kind of rolls downhill. There's like a slope. That's an indication, guys, that you may need to have your foundation checked.
Number 3, those sticky doors that just don't close right. And sometimes they drag the ground a bit and may scrape a bit. That could be an indication of movement that's happening with the foundation. It could also be humidity, so it may be absolutely nothing. But again, if you notice it over an extended period of time, that's something you want to have checked out.
Okay, another sign, guys, sagging or uneven floors, right? So your floors are not even, right? You got that sagging. Now, typically, this is going to fall more in line with your pier and beam foundations. So if you're walking on your pier and beam and then you're walking, you're like, whoa, it feels like the floor is kind of giving a little bit, where you feel like maybe if you did that, you go straight through. Now I'm exaggerating, but guys, if you feel that little sagging, that's another indication you might need to have your foundation checked.
The next one, when your windows and doors start to pull away from the frame. So you'll notice that the windows and doors, there's gaps in between them, and you can see light coming through, there's air pockets there. That's not supposed to be. They should be flush. You shouldn't be able to see light through them. So if you're noticing that, call an expert.
Yep, and guys, another sign number 6 would be the foundation upheaving, we call it. It's like a upheaving. Now, when we mention settling is where your soil, the clay soils, etc., begin to expand or contrast, but underneath there, you see your foundation start to kind of settle down. Upheaving is when you get up, like you're walking on your foundation, and you feel like you can trip because the foundation is higher up. Upheaving, that's a sign, guys. If you have that going on, you probably want to have your foundation checked.
The very last one, again, we're going to be talking about pulling away, but this time cabinets. So your cabinets are starting to separate from the wall. Again, that should not be. So if you can see back behind your cabinets, or your kids can drop things back behind your cabinets, then that again could be another indicator that there is a problem. So you want to get that checked out.
Yep. And guys, listen, another thing that we want to point out, all of this we're mentioning to you is just to let you know that there's no reason for you to be alarmed and to panic and to say, oh my God, you know, what am I gonna do? It's really to say, hey, you're a homeowner, you know, you have a home that you're trying to sell, they're just things you need to have an awareness of.
So what should you do if you as a homeowner feel that your home has issues with the foundation? Well, what we suggest is you call a specialist to come in and check out either your slab or your pier and beam foundation.
And Keisha, actually guys, that's exactly what we've done today. Today, the house behind us, we are going to help you determine whether or not it needs foundation repairs or not. And guys, listen, we have a specialist, Brandon, with Structured Foundation Repairs here today to do exactly that. Help us evaluate this property. So,
awesome.
what do you say? Do we
Come
get
on
Brandon?
over,
Come on, Brandon.
Well, thank you all. I appreciate you having me out. And it's rare that anyone gets this excited about a foundation evaluation, but it doesn't have to be the scariest thing in the world. So what I'd like to do today is kind of walk y'all through some things that I look for and that may indicate a foundation problem, but I want you guys at home to know that just one of these things that we point out doesn't always mean that there's a foundation problem. So, but what we do, just to kind of generalize the evaluation process, is we draw up a diagram of the property to scale, first of all, and then we walk around and we look for stress signs on the house, cracks, things like that we're going to point out on this one. And then we go inside and we take a floor elevation survey that shows us how high or low the floors are relative to a reference point, which I'll explain. And then we put those things together and we have some criteria that we go over to determine if a house has a problem or not. So if y'all are ready, we can start walking around the property and I can start showing you some things that may indicate that there's a problem.
Well, I know I'm ready.
Yeah,
And I'm sure they're ready too.
Well,
So
let's take a look.
Take a walk.
Let's do it.
All right.
Okay, so I'm going to start out on this side of the house, and what I would do is I would simply measure the length of this wall to the fence. We measure things like property lines and things like that so that we know where those are. And then what I do is I simply walk down the wall and I'm going to start to look for things that may indicate a problem. And when I do this, my eyes just kind of go up and down the wall until I come to something that I think may indicate a problem. And right here, for example, we can see a crack in the wall. I can see my natural reaction is to look up to look at the window frame here and see if I can see any separation between the window frame and the brick. But if we walk further down the wall, I can see that I've got an even bigger crack on the wall here. And then if I look right past the crack along the door frame, I can see where the door frame is separated from the brick. Right here, and even more so on this side.
Well, Brandon, if I could, yeah.
Yes, sir.
Of course, looking at this, man, first thing I say is, oh my goodness. I mean, does it matter, you know, that it's, I mean, there's like a half inch versus, I mean, does that, because the other crack you showed us didn't have, does that make a difference? Or?
Really good question, a question that I get all the time. And the answer is a crack is a crack, and a crack means movement. So a lot of times, folks will ask me, well, Brandon, if a crack just goes through the mortar, it's not a problem, right? But if it goes through the brick, then it is. Well, that's not the case. A crack is going to take the path of least resistance, whether that's through the mortar or whether it's through the brick. Now, I also get the question about the thickness of the crack. You know, some people will have a rule of thumb about what, you know, kind of coin you can stick in the crack or anything like that. There really is no rule of thumb for that. So I can have a very thin crack that may be meaningless, but it may be meaningful as well. You know, a big thick crack like this with some separation associated with it, you know, even though it just goes through the mortar there, you know, pretty sure that this is a problem. This is not normal. Okay. A normally constructed house, you do not expect to have something like this.
Okay, great.
So as we continue around here, what I then look at is I'll look up at the top. And what I'm looking for here is I'm looking at the freeze boards, and that's this component right where I'm pointing, right below the eave and above the brick. And you can see where it's separated up there at the top. Well, that's because this wall, as we can see by the crack over here, has settled this way and it's pushed those fascia boards out, creating that separation. And at the same time, I can tell that the wall is rotating this way because it's pushing those boards out. And I can see a little bit of separation along this garage door frame and the brick, but I can see it even more so on the other side. So as I walk over to this side of the garage, here you see an even better example of the door frame, the garage door frame separating from the brick. This should be flushed together with the brick at all times. And then,
Brandon, if you don't
yes.
mind, you know, sometimes I know I get questioned a lot. Like here, I know this is a slab. It's not the actual house,
Right.
but people are like, oh my goodness, you know, the slab is a separation. There's like this, you can trip. So, you know, look at this big dip here. Is that any indicate? Because I always say, well, it's separate, it's not attached, but I don't know. What would you say to that?
Right. Well, this is an indication of what may be going on with the house, but this is separate. So this is not something that I would attach to the foundation itself. In other words, if you have a problem going on with the slab of the driveway, that doesn't necessarily mean that you have something going on with the house. So this would be considered a separate issue. Again, we've got the freeze board separation up at the top. And then if I walk along here, and remember I'm diagramming these stress signs as I move along. And so what I can see here is I can see a crack that goes through the concrete of the front porch here. And that in and of itself isn't necessarily a big deal, okay? If that's the only thing that I see, that just doesn't necessarily mean that I have a big problem. But what catches my eye and may be an issue is that I can see where that crack, if you look under the bench there, goes right through the side of the slab. Now, again, if that's the only thing I have going on with the house and I don't have any other stress signs inside or outside of the house, that may not be a big deal. But when I look at those, I'm looking at that as a possible potential hinge point for the movement or the settlement of the house. So then what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna continue along the house here, and we're just gonna walk along. And I'm going to continue to kind of scan the brick, and I'm going to look up at the corners. I'm going to look at the window frames in the brick here. This is what it really should look like. You see how that's nice and flush together. That's what we want to see. Here I found another crack. So we have a big brick crack right along this wall, and this not only does it crack right through the exactly, that's what I was looking at. It cracks right through the mortar like we talked about, but it also cracks through the brick. May take some more force to crack through a brick, but again, a crack is going to take the path of least resistance, whether it's through the mortar or through the brick. So as we continue to move along here, I'm going to go past the AC unit, and I can see a little bit of separation up here. I can see where the siding's been kind of pushed out. That may be a water issue, but I see a little bit of separation up there. And so what I would have done is marked all of these stress signs on my diagram, and then what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna go inside and point some things out to you on the inside of the garage that I noticed.
Oh, great.
The things that I look for on the interior would be things like this. You see where the door frame is out of square?
Oh,
And
yes.
this is,
Daylight coming in.
exactly, you can see daylight coming in at the corner.
Okay.
And this is almost like an arrow. Remember the crack that we looked at on the side of the garage? That was right on the other side of this door. And so we know that it's settling, and we can also see a crack coming off the corner of the door there. And then when I look at the floor, this, again, we talk about hinge points, or the areas, the cracks in the slab where it's settling. Well, this one happens to be in the garage.
Oh, and I even standing here, Brandon, I feel like
You feel it going down,
yeah,
right?
going down.
You do. Well, a garage is always going to naturally slope down for drainage, but you pinpointed something there because your foot right there is standing right along this crack. And Patrick, I think this is a crack that's causing the foundation of the garage to move this way. But I also have this crack going the opposite way, where it's causing the foundation of this garage to move that way, to move in the opposite direction. So we've got forward movement and we've got movement along the side. So you can see where that garage door frame would separate from the brick, the freeze board would separate, and our door frame, because of the forward movement, would be out of square going that way. Okay. I can see where I've got some cracks here. One of them is even re-cracked, but I can see where this is cracked right along this seam right here and right above this entryway to the hall. And so I know that that was cracked, and I can attribute that to the movement that I'm seeing on the outside and the overall foundation issue. So now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna measure the inside of the house by taking a floor elevation survey.
Can I ask a question, Brandon?
Yes.
Where you have two pieces of sheetrock that come together, typically there's tape there.
Yes.
Is there a way, because one of the questions I get from my clients all the time is where the tape might be moving, it looks like a crack. So is